G'day everyone, it's Maydad here, coming at you live from Bondi Beach, Sydney, Australia. Hope you're all having an amazing day and thank you for joining us on this beautiful morning. Now today's topic that we are going to be discussing and talking about is the topic of adverse childhood experiences, also known as ACEs. Now the word trauma is used everywhere you go by health coaches, health and wellness experts, life coaches, psychologists, and so many other health professionals. It's a word that should not be taken lightly, as the outcomes and effects are very real in each and every one of us. Now, obviously, different people are affected to different levels and degrees. However, trauma is responsible for so much more than most of us realize. Now, here's some important information that I've collected over my research. In high doses, trauma affects brain development. It affects the immune system, hormonal system, and even how your DNA is read and transcribed. Those who have been exposed to high levels of trauma have triple the risk of heart disease and cancer, and may face up to even 20 years differences in life expectancies. This exposure isn't from chemically modified foods, drugs, smoking, or even alcohol. What we're talking about is something much deeper and more widespread. Childhood trauma. This trauma that we're referring to here is not about losing a sporting game or failing an exam. It's about abuse, neglect, emotional support, unmet needs, and environments where childhood confidence and self-esteem are crushed, hindering their self-growth, emotional regulation, and happiness. If we just take a look around and see how many kids today are said to suffer from attention deficit disorders, also known as ADD or ADHD. Across hundreds of studies, it was found that most of these children didn't even actually suffer from ADHD, and more importantly, they suffered from severe trauma early in their life. So what we really need to look at is how exposure to adversity impacts the development of a child's brain and body. Now, it wasn't until the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, also known as ACEs, that the world began to recognize the deep impact that trauma has on childhood development. In the landmark studies that were carried out in Kaiser, where researchers surveyed 17,500 adults about exposure to trauma, called Adverse Children's Experiences. And what they discovered was an astounding amount of research. And the higher the person's ACEs scores, the worse their health outcomes were. A person with a high ACEs score had triple the lifetime risk of pulmonary heart disease and cancer. They were also at much risk of hepatitis, depression, and suicidal tendencies. We now understand why the exposure to early adversity literally changes the body and brain of a child. So there's a real neurological reasons why people exposed to high levels of trauma are more likely to engage at high-risk behavior. And even if they don't, they're consistently activated of the flight and fight stress response, causing long-term harm, like thyroid issues, chronic fatigue, and so much more. Now, this isn't just about stress happening once a blue moon. It's about stress coming home every single day. When this cycle is repeated over and over again, with children whose brains and bodies are still developing are extremely vulnerable. And high doses of adversity doesn't just affect the brain, they in fact impact hormonal development and other body's abilities to heal and regulate itself. A perfect example of that, when we understand how these biological pathways are disturbed, and how we must also understand that, in the words of Dr. Robert Block, adverse childhood experiences, also known as ACEs, are the single most underestimated public health and threat that we face today. Thanks for joining us. We look forward to seeing you next week. Take care and have an amazing day.